Hello, everybody. Don't mind my headset. I was having some audio difficulties, so I'm using my boyfriend's gamer headset to present my PowerPoint. So, welcome to my Pathway to Profession PowerPoint. I hope you enjoy and learn something new and learn about my experience. So, for my goal overview, my technology goal was to learn how to make a video of a read aloud to share with students online. I was very surprised that I wasn't as tech savvy as I thought going into this online practicum. I always thought that that technology came easy to me and I was able to troubleshoot things, but I was wrong. I struggled a lot with finding resources that worked for me when sharing lesson plans and everything virtually. Um, so, what actually helped me was throughout the term on the Facebook group with a majority of the people in our cohort. I learned a couple resources as well as reached out to my supervisor, CT, Mandy, and these are the things that worked best for me. So I put the Screencast-O-Matic. Don't mind the spelling error right there. I didn't realize that until I pressed play. But the Screencast-O-Matic is probably my favorite. Right now, it's my least favorite because my computer kind of went kaput and I struggled to do Screencast-O-Matic on it. So I'm actually using my aunt's laptop and using the Screencastify right now, and that works really well for me. What I didn't like about the Screencast-O-Matic was that you got limited time that you could record. I like how the Screencastify is unlimited time to record. I also like the Google Meets and Zoom. I put that last because I didn't use it as much, but I used it when I worked with my CT online and everything. But when I did my own personal lessons, I really liked the Screencast-O-Matic and Screencastify. Um, my culturally responsive practice goal was to gather 3 methods to differentiate for my future classroom. I gathered these methods off of the Moodle page because I thought there were some really good resources on there. So I snagged a couple that I really liked and will be using in my future classroom. I think the most important is the reteach and enrich. I think a lot of teachers, just from my experience and what I've seen, as well as when I was in school, if students were struggling, it was just always to just keep moving forward. And that, for me, I struggled a lot in high school when that was the case, and I would become overwhelmed. And I know a lot of other students would feel the same way. So in my future classroom, I think it's super important to gather data and just to see where your students at. And if you need to reteach and enrich your students, then to totally go for it. I think that's super important. Um, my next thing is using learning menus. I just thought this was a really good idea because it gives students that variety and choice to be able to present themselves however they are most comfortable with their learning styles. Not all students learn the same, as you know. And like for me, I'm a very visual person. I need to see it and to be engaged in it. And it's hard for me. I get a lot of test anxiety. And when it comes to just paper and pen and right or wrong, I struggle a lot. So if I'm like a hands-on kind of person and in the moment, so I love projects and being able to present myself in a way where I can explain myself. And I think the menus is a great idea for my future classroom to use. Lastly, just using computer games. There was a video that I watched where a teacher used it during math time, where they had tablets and computers, I believe. A lot of great resources, but using different kind of games or apps or whatever during math time. We kind of did that at my clinical site. We did math centers, and some people got to go on the computers, and then there was games and stuff. I think that's a great way to get students involved in their learning and to enjoy it and to have that hands-on time, but it's also a great time to help your support students that are struggling or maybe need that reteach or reteach and enrich time. And I think when I was at my clinical site, I would see my clinical teacher do that at the back table. She would pull students that needed that extra help. And then I would also pull small groups to the hall and we would work together. So I think that's a great way to keep your other students engaged, but also to give the students that are struggling and might need a little extra help more support. And lastly, my Danielson framework related goal was by the end of spring term, I will gather at least 5 different classroom management techniques that will create the foundation of mutual respect and rapport with my future classroom. So I'll go into more detail with that on this slide. I'm going to move my camera. So why I chose it was I always struggled with classroom management and finding a method that fit my personality and beliefs in the classroom. I had this misconception that classroom management meant being strict and firm, because that's what I always saw with the majority of my teachers, as well as just in general. I feel like a lot of students talk about how their teachers are strict or scary. I personally have a very nurturing and loving approach with my students, and it was hard for me to be strict, not necessarily because I wanted to be liked, but I wanted my students to feel very safe and comfortable around me and be able to come to me if they have any problems or just need help. And I learned a lot of different techniques that could help me have that approach in the classroom and follow what fits me best in regards to my personality and beliefs. So the first one is just simply building relationships, and the second one is to build a classroom community. Those kind of go hand in hand, but first I think it's super important to create those relationships with one-on-one with your students, and you can do that in a variety of ways. When I was at my clinical side, as well as what I plan to do in my future classroom, is to always greet students at the door every single morning and call them by name and ask them how they're doing, do check-ins with them. I think that's super important to do. In my future classroom, I plan on having students or giving students the option when they come to class to high five, hug, fist bump, dance, or whatever they want to do. There's a couple different choices, but I always really like that idea, and I've seen videos and stuff where kids get really excited doing that. What else? And also just getting to know your students and their home lives and interests and families and everything. You can do that in a variety of ways, like sending home letters or sending home like a questionnaire, stuff like that. I think is super important. And then when I was talking about the build a classroom community, I just think it's important to have those meetings, like morning meetings, as well as meetings whenever needed. If we need to come together as a class and talk about something that's important, or even like SEL time. I think it's important to work together as a group and to be on the same page. And I strongly believe in working collaboratively with each other and to be in pairs or groups or just work together as a team. Teamwork is super important to me. And I want my students to feel like they are heard and can help each other and all those great things that come along with working in collaboration. I also strongly believe in the bucket filling / dipping and all of that. I plan to have a bucket filling reward system in my classroom in the future, where they're kind of different rewards, where if the class fills someone's bucket, or if they fill my bucket, or I just notice kindness happening in the classroom, I will put things inside of our classroom bucket. And then once it gets to the top, I plan to incorporate things like pajama day or classroom party or bring your stuffed animal day. I think those are some good ideas. And lastly, with that, building a classroom community, I think it's important. I don't know if this would necessarily work with like kindergarten or first grade, but if I was teaching older grades, I would want the um, what is it called? I wish my teacher knew cards so that students can communicate with me and feel like their voice is heard. I think it's super important to build those relationships and to make sure that students feel safe and comfortable with you. I actually should have put that for number one for build relationships, but as a whole, I think it should be accessible for all students in the classroom. The third is I found that Love and Logic just is my jam. I love Love and Logic, and I think it's a great method to use in the classroom and fits my personality really well. It emphasizes with students, it gives students a voice and options, it guides students to solve problems, and allows you to talk, or it it's a way for you to be very positive with your students and to make them feel comfortable and not necessarily scared of you, which is like my biggest concern. I don't want students to be afraid of me, and I want them to be comfortable in my care. Next is zones of regulation. I think that's super important to have in the classroom, as well as just like a break box or a zones break of some sort. I think that's a great way for students to communicate their feelings and control their emotions, and to have a place where they can feel safe when they're overwhelmed or upset in any way. I think it's important for them to take breaks and to calm down and have resources to help them with that. Lastly, routines and procedures. I would say this is one of the most important things in all classrooms. You need to teach, model, and have students model and practice these constantly throughout the school year. It sets expectations and allows mutual respect between teacher and students to student, as well as establishes that responsibility in the classroom and in school and even outside of school. What I learned from this process was a lot of things, but these are just some things, like the main ideas that I pulled from each of my goals. In technology, I learned that I'm not super tech savvy like I thought I was, and I'm glad that I learned a lot of different resources during this term, and I felt like our cohort came together and was just very helpful with one another. And I love that we had that Facebook group, and I felt like my supervisor and cohort leaders and everything were super supportive and were always willing to help us in any way possible. Some resources that I grew to love was Seesaw. I never used that before. We actually used Class Dojo when schools were in session and everything, and I grew to really like Seesaw a lot better than Class Dojo. I knew how to use Google Classroom before the pandemic and everything, because I actually went to a professional development seminar type class thing to learn about Google Classroom, and I love it. I think it's great. I will definitely be using it in my future classroom. And then just like Google Meets, Zoom, and YouTube, the basics. In regards to being culturally responsive, I think I learned the most from that, because I kind of had like this misconception that because I was white, I couldn't, or that students would feel like I can't relate to them. It might be like standoffish, or feel like because I can't relate to them, that I can't understand. And I found that that's not the case. I actually grew up in a very diverse community and went to Reynolds High School. I was in the Reynolds district my whole life, and it's very diverse. So my whole life, I feel like I have been exposed to that, and I'm very welcoming, and I really want to learn about other people's backgrounds and cultures and everything. In regards to having my future classroom, I think it's super important to just constantly be learning about how you can be culturally responsive and methods that work best for your students. Some of my favorite strategies that I have learned is to learn how to pronounce students' names, and to just pronounce them correctly and just keep trying, because That's super important, and a way to build relationships with your students as well. If you're not pronouncing their name right, they will not feel respected by you, and that's the number one thing for me, is just respect, and for students to know that I care about them and that they are safe with me. My next thing is to value a student's native language. I think that is super, super important, and to provide visuals and graphics to support students' comprehension skills. I try to do that a lot at my clinical site, um, and I plan to do it forever. It's something that I'm constantly going to be doing with my students. Um, and just displaying students' work on the wall, include multicultural materials and lessons. And then, sorry for the spelling error again, but just learn about students' families and home lives, and show that you care and you want to learn. And for students to correct you if you get something wrong. Like I want students to be able to confront me, obviously in a respectful way. But if I am wrong about something in regards to their culture or backgrounds or whatever, I want them to be able to feel comfortable enough to tell me the correct thing that whatever it was. Lastly, classroom management. I learned a lot, but as I talked about in the previous slide, I just thought it was like about a lot of trial and error and just finding what works best for me. And I found that Love and Logic is kind of my method that I personally connected with for classroom management. And I just prefer this because I have a very calm and nurturing approach. And I want my students to feel loved and safe and welcome in my classroom. And I don't want them to be afraid and to feel like I'm this strict, firm teacher, because that's just not me, and it doesn't work well for me and my teaching style. Lastly, my goals for my first year of teaching is I plan to continue to learn more about my goals that I had. It's just because they were my goals for this year doesn't mean I don't want to constantly learn and grow as I teach in my first years of teaching, or even just my teaching career in general. I think it's important to always learn and grow, and I plan to continue my education and get my master's, get my ESOL endorsement, maybe even my reading endorsement. I have a lot of plans for my future, and I just think it's always going to be constantly learning and growing. But my main thing is I really want to focus in on creating culturally responsive lessons in my classroom, and just having a very culturally responsive environment where students feel that they are heard and safe and welcomed, like I talked about before. And I just really want an environment where students feel that and can learn and grow. Okay, I think that is it. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you all have a good day.